Emily Parker was 18 years old when she became homeless.
Not the kind of homeless where a friend lets you stay on the couch for a few nights. Not the kind where family members promise to help until you get back on your feet. The kind where you wake up every morning wondering where you'll sleep that night.
Everything she owned fit inside a single backpack. A few clothes, a flashlight, a blanket, and $50. That was all she had left in the world. Most people would have spent that money on food, or a cheap motel room, or a bus ticket to somewhere warmer. Emily did something nobody could understand. She bought an abandoned greenhouse for $50. The place looked like it had been forgotten for decades. Half the glass panels were shattered. The roof leaked whenever it rained. Weeds grew higher than her waist. People in town laughed when they saw her moving in. They told her the greenhouse was worthless. They told her nobody could survive there through winter. They told her she was making the biggest mistake of her life. At first, it seemed they were right. Then, strange things started happening. An elderly farmer asked if she had ever heard the name Evelyn Hart, a name nobody seemed willing to discuss for very long. Weeks later, while digging beneath an old planting table, Emily's shovel struck wood. Buried beneath the greenhouse floor was a locked trunk, a trunk that had remained hidden for nearly 50 years. Inside were letters, maps, and documents connected to a vanished woman, missing land records, and a secret someone had spent decades trying to keep buried. What began as a desperate fight to survive the winter was about to become a journey into a mystery hidden beneath the soil itself. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Whether it's early morning with a cup of coffee, late at night before bed, or somewhere in between. I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you notice any mistakes in the story, have ideas about the mystery, or simply want to share your thoughts, leave a comment below. I always enjoy reading them. And if you enjoy stories about survival, hidden secrets, forgotten places, and ordinary people rebuilding their lives from nothing, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss future stories. Now, let's go back to the day an 18-year-old girl spent her last $50 on a greenhouse that everyone else had forgotten. Emily Parker sat in the driver's seat of a rusted sedan that hadn't moved in nearly 2 years and watched rain slide down the windshield. The car wasn't hers. Nothing about her situation belonged to her anymore. The owner of the small trailer park where she had been sleeping for the past week had finally noticed the abandoned vehicle and told her to leave. Politely at first, less politely afterward. Now she sat alone on the edge of a rural Pennsylvania road with a backpack, a blanket, and exactly $50 folded inside her wallet. The rain made everything feel colder. She checked her phone. No missed calls, no messages. No miracle waiting to arrive. The battery sat at 12% anyway. Even if someone wanted to help, she probably wouldn't know about it. Emily leaned her head against the steering wheel and closed her eyes. She wasn't looking for sympathy. Life had taught her early that sympathy rarely solved problems. What she needed was a roof, a place to sleep before winter arrived. The forecast already mentioned overnight frost. Pennsylvania winters didn't care whether someone had a home. Around sunset, she climbed out of the car and started walking. A small farming town sat several miles away. She hoped to find work, or shelter, or both. The town wasn't much more than a handful of businesses clustered around a main street. A hardware store, a diner, a gas station, a library. Emily spent the next 2 hours asking questions and receiving mostly apologetic answers. Nobody was hiring. Nobody had spare rooms. Nobody could really help. By the time darkness settled over the town, she found herself sitting on a bench outside the library, staring at her reflection in the dark windows. 18 years old, homeless, $50. Not exactly the future she imagined. The next morning, she entered the library mostly because it was warm. The building smelled like old paper and coffee.
Emily spent nearly an hour browsing local notices pinned to a bulletin board near the entrance. Most advertisements were useless. Yard sales, farm equipment, lost pets. Then one faded piece of paper caught her attention. Property transfer auction. Several abandoned structures listed below. Storage sheds, barns, equipment buildings. One item stood out immediately. Greenhouse property. Former Hart Farm. Transfer fee, $50. Emily stared at the listing. $50. Exactly $50. She almost laughed. It felt ridiculous. Then again, her entire life felt ridiculous lately. The attached photograph showed a long greenhouse standing alone in an overgrown field. Several glass panels appeared broken. Weeds surrounded the structure. Most people would probably call it worthless. Emily kept staring anyway. By noon, curiosity won. She borrowed directions from the librarian and started walking toward the property. The greenhouse sat nearly 3 miles outside town, beyond several abandoned farm fields. The closer she got, the more isolated everything became. Finally, she spotted it. The structure stretched across a clearing surrounded by wild grass and neglected trees. From a distance, it looked almost beautiful. Up close, reality returned. Several roof panels were missing entirely. Vines climbed portions of the frame. One side door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Yet despite years of neglect, the greenhouse still stood. Emily approached slowly. The air inside felt warmer than expected. Sunlight filtered through surviving glass panels and illuminated rows of abandoned planting beds. Nature had reclaimed much of the interior. Wildflowers grew where vegetables once thrived. Small trees pushed through sections of cracked flooring. Yet she immediately noticed something important. Shelter. The greenhouse wasn't comfortable. It wasn't safe. But it blocked the wind. That mattered. She spent nearly an hour exploring. At the rear stood a small storage room attached to the main structure. Dust covered everything. Old gardening tools leaned against one wall. Broken shelves occupied another. Most people would have seen a ruin. Emily saw possibilities. By late afternoon, she found herself standing inside the county office, signing paperwork. The clerk looked confused. "You understand this property has been abandoned for years." Emily nodded. "I know. The greenhouse isn't connected to utilities." "Okay. It probably needs extensive repairs." Emily smiled faintly. "Still sounds better than sleeping outside." The woman couldn't argue with that. 30 minutes later, Emily walked back toward the greenhouse carrying official ownership papers. For the first time in months, she owned something. It wasn't much, a broken greenhouse sitting in an overgrown field, but it belonged to her. The first evening proved challenging. The storage room became her temporary bedroom. She swept away debris, moved broken furniture, created a sleeping area using her blanket and backpack. The accommodations weren't luxurious, yet they were hers. As darkness settled outside, unfamiliar sounds filled the greenhouse. Wind rattled loose glass panels, branches scraped against the structure. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Emily lay awake, listening. Despite everything, she felt safer than she had in weeks. Morning brought practical problems: water, food, repairs, survival. She spent the day cleaning. Dead vines disappeared. Walkways emerged beneath years of neglect. Several planting beds became visible again. The work felt strangely satisfying. Every improvement transformed the greenhouse from abandoned property into a home. Late that afternoon, while clearing weeds beneath an old wooden planting table near the center of the structure, she noticed something unusual. The soil looked different there, darker, disturbed.
Not recently.
Years ago. Emily crouched beside the area and brushed away loose dirt. The ground wasn't level. A shallow depression sat beneath the table, almost as if someone had dug there long ago and then covered it again. She frowned. The discovery wasn't dramatic, yet something about it bothered her. Most of the greenhouse looked untouched by human hands for years. This section felt different, intentional. Before she could investigate further, daylight began fading. Survival still came first. Water needed collecting, a meal needed preparing. Answers could wait until tomorrow. That night, as rain tapped softly against the greenhouse roof, Emily found herself thinking about the disturbed patch of soil. She didn't know why. Maybe because it was the first mystery she had encountered in a long time, or maybe because deep down, she already suspected the abandoned greenhouse held more than broken glass and forgotten plants. Emily woke before sunrise because she was cold. Not dangerously cold yet, but cold enough that sleep became impossible. A thin layer of condensation covered several greenhouse windows. Her breath appeared faintly in the air. Winter was still weeks away, yet the season was already making introductions. She sat up inside the storage room and pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. For a few moments, she listened to the quiet sounds of the greenhouse waking around her. Water dripping from a cracked roof panel, leaves rustling somewhere overhead, the distant call of crows outside. Strange as it sounded, the abandoned structure already felt familiar. Not comfortable. Familiar. The distinction mattered. After a breakfast consisting of crackers and the last of a peanut butter jar, Emily focused on the most important problem: water. The greenhouse had no plumbing, no electricity, no utilities of any kind. Fortunately, rainwater collection was possible. Several old barrels sat behind the structure, partially hidden beneath weeds. Most were damaged. One remained usable by mid-morning. She had rigged a crude system using a section of broken gutter and a plastic container. It wasn't elegant. It worked. Small victories mattered, especially when nobody else was solving your problems for you. The next task involved food. The greenhouse might not have money hidden inside it, but it did have soil. Lots of soil. Emily spent several hours inspecting the old planting beds. Many had become overgrown beyond easy recovery. Others still looked surprisingly healthy. She wasn't an expert gardener. Her grandfather had taught her enough basics years earlier to recognize potential. Some sections simply needed effort. Around noon, she walked into town searching for inexpensive seeds. The trip took nearly an hour. Her wallet now contained less than $5. Every purchase required careful thought. The hardware store owner noticed her examining seed packets longer than most customers. Looking for something specific? Emily smiled awkwardly. Something cheap. The man laughed softly. Aren't we all? Eventually, she purchased a few packets of lettuce, spinach, and radish seeds, not because they were exciting, because they were practical. Fast-growing vegetables meant food sooner. As she left the store, an older man loading feed bags into a pickup truck watched her for a moment. His face looked weathered in the way only decades of outdoor work could accomplish. Thick hands, worn boots, a faded jacket that had probably seen more winters than Emily had. You're the girl who bought the greenhouse. Emily stopped. Small towns worked fast. Apparently, everyone already knew. I guess I am.
The old man nodded toward the edge of town. Former Hart property. Emily recognized the name from the auction notice. That's right. Something changed in his expression, not dramatically, just enough to notice. Interesting place. Emily waited. People always said that right before sharing information, usually useful information. You know much about it? She asked. The man adjusted a feed bag in the truck bed. More than most. Then he extended a hand. Walter Briggs. Emily introduced herself. Walter studied her for a second. Living there? She nodded. The old farmer looked toward the cloudy sky. Going to be a rough winter. Not exactly encouraging. Yet he wasn't wrong. I'll manage. Walter smiled faintly. You sound like someone who hasn't met a Pennsylvania January yet. That earned a laugh from Emily, the first genuine laugh she'd had in days. Before leaving, Walter reached into his truck and handed her a small box. Leftover greenhouse clips. Emily looked inside. Metal fasteners used to secure glass panels. Exactly the kind of thing she needed. I can't pay for these. Walter shrugged. Good thing I wasn't selling them. She thanked him several times before continuing home. As she walked back toward the greenhouse, she found herself smiling. Not because her problems had disappeared. They hadn't. But because somebody had treated her like a person instead of a problem. That felt surprisingly valuable. The next several days settled into a routine. Mornings involved repairs. Afternoons focused on planting and cleaning. Evenings belonged to planning. Emily discovered that structure made difficult situations easier to survive. If she stayed busy, she spent less time worrying. Slowly, the greenhouse improved. Broken pathways became usable again. Weeds disappeared from several growing beds. Rainwater collection increased. Tiny green sprouts even appeared in one section where she planted lettuce. Seeing those first shoots emerge from the soil felt strangely emotional. Proof that something was growing. Proof that effort mattered. One afternoon, while repairing a damaged section of glass near the northern wall, she heard an engine approaching. Walter's pickup truck rolled into the clearing. The old farmer climbed out carrying a thermos and a cardboard box. Brought coffee. Emily immediately approved of this visit. They sat outside beside the greenhouse while autumn wind moved through the surrounding fields. Walter seemed content with silence. Emily appreciated that. Some people asked too many questions. Walter only asked the important ones. Eventually, his attention shifted toward the greenhouse. You find anything unusual yet? Emily frowned. Unusual? The old man looked away for a moment. Old places have stories. Interesting answer. Not an answer, but interesting. Emily thought about the disturbed soil beneath the planting table. She hadn't investigated it further. Not yet. Something held her back. Maybe because survival still occupied most of her attention. Maybe because mysteries felt dangerous when life already contained enough uncertainty. Walter noticed her hesitation immediately. What? Emily debated for a moment, then decided it couldn't hurt. There's a patch of ground that looks like it was dug up years ago. The old farmer became very still, not dramatically, just enough for her to notice. Where? Near one of the old planting tables. Walter stared toward the greenhouse, then toward the distant hills, then back toward the structure. Did you ever hear of Evelyn Hart? The name landed strangely, like a piece of a puzzle she didn't know existed. Emily shook her head. Should I have? Walter didn't answer immediately. For several seconds, he simply watched the greenhouse. Finally, he stood. Most people around here forgot about her. That wasn't an answer either, yet somehow it felt more important than one. Before leaving, Walter paused beside his truck. If you find anything unusual, don't throw it away. Emily frowned. What kind of unusual? The old farmer smiled. That's the problem. You won't know until you find it. Then he drove away. That evening, Emily found herself staring at the disturbed patch of soil again. The greenhouse stood quiet around her. Shadows stretched across the planting beds. Somewhere overhead, rain tapped gently against glass. Evelyn Hart. The name kept replaying in her mind, whoever she was. Walter clearly knew something, and for the first time since buying the greenhouse, Emily felt certain of one thing. The old structure wasn't simply abandoned. It was waiting for someone to ask the right questions. For the next few days, Emily tried to focus on practical problems. Practical problems were easier. Practical problems had solutions. Broken glass could be replaced. Soil could be improved. Water could be collected. Mysteries were different. Mysteries sat quietly in the back of your mind while you worked. They waited. Every time she walked past the old planting table near the center of the greenhouse, she found herself looking at the disturbed patch of soil. Every time she remembered Walter's reaction to Evelyn Hart's name, her curiosity grew stronger. Yet survival continued demanding attention. One morning, she woke to discover frost covering portions of the greenhouse roof. The sight immediately raised her stress level. Winter was getting closer. Fast. She spent the entire day sealing gaps between broken panels using salvaged plastic and leftover materials Walter had provided. The repairs weren't pretty. They were effective. That evening, temperatures inside the greenhouse remained several degrees warmer than outside. For Emily, that felt like a major victory. The next afternoon, she harvested her first handful of lettuce leaves. The harvest wouldn't impress anyone at a farmer's market, yet standing inside the greenhouse holding food she had grown herself produced a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. Pride. Real pride. Not because the lettuce solved her problems, because it proved she could solve some of them herself. The following morning, she decided to visit the library, partly to warm up, partly because she couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn Hart. The library sat nearly empty when she arrived. Sunlight streamed through tall windows while a young woman organized returned books behind the front desk. She looked to be in her late 20s and wore the expression of someone who genuinely enjoyed helping people find answers. Emily approached carefully. "Can I ask a weird question?" The librarian smiled. "Those are usually the interesting ones." "Fair point. Have you ever heard of someone named Evelyn Hart?" The woman's smile faded slightly. "Not from discomfort. Recognition." The greenhouse. Emily immediately noticed. "You know about her?" The librarian nodded slowly. "A little." Her name was Sarah Collins. Over the next hour, Sarah helped search local historical records. Most information proved frustratingly limited. Newspaper archives mentioned Evelyn only a handful of times. Agricultural competitions, community events, garden society meetings. Nothing unusual. Yet a pattern emerged. Evelyn Hart had been deeply connected to the greenhouse. She operated it for decades. Locals considered her one of the best growers in the county. Then, suddenly, references stopped. "What happened to her?" Emily asked. Sarah leaned back in her chair.
Nobody seems completely sure. Not the answer she wanted. Apparently, it was the only answer available. Several articles mentioned Evelyn selling produce at local markets until the late 1970s. Then she seemed to vanish from public records. No obituary, no farewell announcement. Nothing. Emily left the library carrying photocopies and more questions than answers. The mystery wasn't becoming clearer. It was becoming stranger. Later that evening, she returned to greenhouse repairs. The work helped organize her thoughts. Hammering boards and cleaning planting beds required focus. Focus pushed mysteries aside, at least temporarily. While clearing debris inside the storage room, she discovered an old cabinet hidden behind several shelves. The wood looked damaged by age. Most drawers were empty. One remained stuck shut. Naturally, Emily spent 15 minutes wrestling with it before the drawer finally opened. Inside rested several rusted tools, a handful of seed packets, and a small framed photograph. She froze. The picture showed a woman standing inside the greenhouse decades earlier. Rows of thriving plants stretched behind her. Sunlight filled the structure. Everything looked alive, happy. On the back, someone had written a name. Evelyn Hart. Emily sat down immediately. For the first time, Evelyn became more than a mysterious name from old records. She looked real, mid-50s perhaps, strong features, practical clothing, the sort of person who spent her life working outdoors. Most interesting of all, she looked happy. Emily studied the photograph for several minutes, then noticed something else. In the background stood the same planting table covering the disturbed patch of soil. Her pulse quickened instantly. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. Either way, the connection felt important. The next day brought another surprise. Walter arrived carrying several wooden crates filled with compost and soil amendments. The old farmer looked pleased with himself. "Your plants need better nutrition." Emily laughed. "And here I thought you were just being nice." Walter pretended to look offended. "I am nice." The conversation drifted naturally while they worked. Eventually, Emily showed him the photograph. The old farmer became very quiet. He took the frame carefully, stared at it, then smiled. Not a happy smile, a nostalgic one. "That's Evelyn." Emily nodded. "You knew her?" Walter continued studying the picture. "Most people around here did." Finally, a real answer. They spent the next hour spreading compost through several planting beds, while Walter shared stories. Evelyn Hart had been respected throughout the county, independent, hard-working, stubborn. According to Walter, she practically lived inside the greenhouse. People sought her advice about growing crops. School groups occasionally visited. Local gardeners admired her work. "What happened?" Emily eventually asked. Walter's shovel stopped moving. The silence lasted longer than expected. "One day she was here," he said quietly. "Then she wasn't." Emily frowned. "She just left?" Walter shrugged. "Maybe." That answer felt incomplete. He knew it too. Before Emily could ask more, the old farmer changed the subject, deliberately, expertly. Yet one detail lingered in her mind. Walter wasn't hiding indifference. He was hiding uncertainty, or perhaps concern. That night after dinner, Emily returned to the photograph. Lantern light illuminated the image while rain tapped softly against the greenhouse roof. She examined every detail, every shadow, every object visible in the background. Then something caught her eye. Near the base of the planting table, partially obscured by gardening equipment, sat what appeared to be a wooden hatch built into the floor. Emily sat upright immediately. Her pulse accelerated. She grabbed the photograph and crossed the greenhouse. The planting table remained exactly where it had always been. Beneath it sat the disturbed patch of soil, and after crouching low enough to compare angles, she realized something important. The hatch visible in the photograph no longer existed, or at least, it no longer appeared to exist. Someone had covered it, buried it, hidden it. The greenhouse suddenly felt much quieter around her. Outside, wind moved through the surrounding fields. Inside, Emily stared at the ground beneath the planting table, somewhere between Evelyn Hart's disappearance and the present day. Part of the greenhouse had been deliberately concealed, and for the first time, she felt certain that whatever was hidden beneath the soil had something to do with why Evelyn Hart vanished from local history. Emily spent the next week trying not to think about the hidden hatch. Unfortunately, the greenhouse made that nearly impossible. Every time she walked past the old planting table, her eyes drifted toward the patch of disturbed soil beneath it. Every time she remembered the photograph of Evelyn Hart standing beside the same spot decades earlier, her curiosity grew stronger. Yet survival remained the more urgent problem. Curiosity didn't keep people warm. Curiosity didn't provide food. Curiosity definitely didn't repair broken greenhouse panels before winter arrived. So she focused on work. The routine helped. Mornings started with water collection and greenhouse maintenance. Afternoons were dedicated to growing vegetables and improving the property. Evenings belonged to planning. Slowly, the greenhouse transformed, not dramatically, incrementally. The best kind of progress. Several planting beds now produced lettuce and spinach. Radishes pushed through the soil. A few herbs survived near the warmer southern wall. The harvests remained small, but they were hers. One Saturday morning, Emily loaded her first basket of vegetables and walked into town. The local farmers market occupied a small parking lot behind the community center. Most vendors had years of experience and far better products. Emily expected people to ignore her table. Instead, several customers stopped. Some bought vegetables simply because they liked supporting local growers. Others recognized her as the girl living in the abandoned greenhouse. Small-town curiosity turned out to be surprisingly profitable. By lunchtime, she had earned nearly $30. $30 wasn't much to most people. To Emily, it felt enormous. Walking back toward the greenhouse with money in her pocket and empty produce baskets in her hands produced a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. Optimism. Real optimism. Maybe this could work. Maybe she wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe she was building something. Later that afternoon, Walter stopped by carrying a bundle of old gardening books. Thought these might help. Emily accepted them gratefully. Most focused on greenhouse management, soil health, and winter growing techniques. One contained handwritten notes in the margins. She immediately noticed the handwriting looked older, more deliberate. Who owned this? Walter hesitated, just briefly. Evelyn. Emily stared at the book. The same Evelyn Hart whose photograph sat inside her storage room. The same Evelyn Hart who vanished from local records. The old farmer noticed her expression. She loved writing notes in books. Emily flipped through several pages. Detailed observations filled the margins. Planting schedules, soil temperatures, watering techniques. Practical information. Yet something about holding the book felt personal, like receiving advice from someone she'd never met. That evening, she sat beside a lantern, reading Evelyn's notes, while wind rattled the greenhouse windows. One particular sentence caught her attention. Good growers pay attention to what the soil is trying to tell them. Emily smiled. It sounded exactly like something a lifelong gardener would say. Then she froze. Soil. Her eyes immediately shifted toward the planting table. The disturbed patch beneath it suddenly seemed impossible to ignore. The following morning, she finally decided to investigate, not because she expected treasure, not because she expected answers, because uncertainty had become more distracting than the mystery itself. Armed with a shovel and plenty of skepticism, Emily moved the old planting table aside. The process took nearly an hour. The structure weighed more than expected. Years of dirt and moisture had practically fused parts of it to the floor. Eventually, she succeeded. The disturbed soil lay exposed. Up close, the area looked even more unusual. The earth appeared compacted differently than surrounding sections. Several stones formed a rough outline beneath the surface, almost as if someone had filled something in long ago. Emily knelt and began digging. At first, nothing happened. Just dirt, roots, small rocks, the kind of excavation that convinces people they're wasting their time. Then her shovel struck wood. The sound stopped her instantly. Not a root, not stone. Wood. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she cleared more soil. A flat wooden surface emerged. Old, weathered, deliberately placed. Emily sat back and stared. The photograph hadn't lied. Something had existed beneath the planting table. Something someone buried. She spent the next several hours exposing the structure completely. By late afternoon, the outline became visible. A rectangular wooden hatch built directly into the greenhouse floor, exactly where it appeared in Evelyn's photograph. Emily ran her fingers across the surface. No handle remained visible. No markings. No explanation. Just a hidden hatch concealed beneath decades of soil and neglect. Excitement immediately collided with common sense. Opening unknown underground spaces alone rarely ended well. She decided to wait until morning. That decision lasted approximately 3 hours. By sunset, curiosity won. Again. Using a pry bar from the storage room, she carefully worked around the edges of the hatch. The wood resisted at first, then shifted slightly. Dust rose into the air. A cool draft escaped from below. Emily froze. There was definitely something underneath. She widened the opening just enough to shine a flashlight inside. Darkness greeted her. Then wooden steps. A staircase descended beneath the greenhouse. Her heart immediately started pounding. The hidden hatch wasn't covering storage space. It covered an actual underground chamber. She lowered the flashlight further. The beam illuminated stone walls and a small room below. Most details remained hidden by shadows, yet one thing became obvious. Someone had built the space intentionally. This wasn't a root cellar improvised by a farmer. It looked carefully constructed, purposeful, and forgotten. Emily stared into the darkness for several long moments. Then she slowly lowered the hatch. Whatever waited below had remained hidden for decades. It could survive one more night. Still, as she climbed into bed later, sleep felt impossible. Beneath the greenhouse floor sat a secret room connected somehow to Evelyn Hart. And for the first time since buying the property, Emily felt certain she was standing on the edge of something much larger than an abandoned greenhouse. Emily lasted until sunrise before giving up on patience. She had spent most of the night imagining what might be hidden beneath the greenhouse. Every possibility seemed equally likely. Old gardening supplies,
forgotten tools, a root cellar, maybe nothing important at all. Yet the hidden staircase kept replaying in her mind. People didn't build secret underground rooms without a reason. Morning light filtered through the greenhouse glass as she prepared for the investigation. Flashlight, work gloves, rope, water. The supplies looked excessive for exploring the small underground chamber. Emily preferred excessive over trapped. Before opening the hatch, she completed her normal chores. The plants needed water. Several broken panels required securing before expected rain arrived. Survival still came first by mid-morning. She finally stood beside the hatch again. Her pulse quickened immediately. The wooden cover felt heavier than it had the night before, maybe because now she knew what waited beneath it. She lifted it carefully. Cool air drifted upward. The staircase disappeared into darkness. Emily switched on her flashlight and began climbing down. The stone steps creaked slightly beneath her weight. Dust coated the walls. Yet the structure felt surprisingly stable. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a small underground room, roughly the size of a garden shed. The flashlight beam swept across stone walls, wooden shelves, and old storage containers. Time seemed frozen there. Most objects sat exactly where someone left them decades earlier. Emily moved slowly, not because she was afraid, because she didn't want to miss anything. The room contained gardening supplies, seed containers, notebooks, and tools. Nothing particularly mysterious. Yet the atmosphere itself felt unusual, personal, like stepping into someone else's memories. Then she noticed a wooden chest sitting beneath one of the shelves. Her pulse accelerated immediately. The chest wasn't large, roughly the size of a suitcase. Unlike everything else in the room, it appeared deliberately protected. A canvas cover rested over the top. Dust surrounded it, not on it. Someone cared about this object. Emily knelt beside it. The moment she pulled away the canvas, excitement gave way to frustration. A heavy brass lock secured the lid. Locked. Of course. The mystery finally had its trunk. She laughed, despite herself. If her life were any more predictable, she thought, it would start adding dramatic music. The chest showed no signs of forced entry, no obvious damage, just a lock that had remained closed for decades. Emily tested it anyway. Nothing. The lid didn't move. She spent the next several minutes examining the chest. No key appeared nearby. No clues. No instructions. Just more questions. Eventually, she shifted her attention toward the rest of the room. Several notebooks occupied nearby shelves. Most contained greenhouse records, planting schedules, harvest logs, soil reports. Evelyn Hart had apparently documented everything. The level of detail impressed Emily. She opened one notebook and immediately recognized the handwriting from the gardening book Walter gave her. Evelyn's notes filled every page. Practical observations, weather patterns, crop performance. The entries revealed a personality. Intelligent, organized, patient. Not the type of person who simply vanished without explanation. One particular notebook contained entries from Evelyn's final years at the greenhouse. Emily sat on an overturned crate and began reading. The early pages focused on normal topics, plants, harvests, community events. Then the tone gradually shifted. Certain entries became shorter, more guarded. References to meetings appeared, property records, boundary surveys, conversations with lawyers. Emily frowned. None of that sounded related to gardening. Then she found a sentence underlined twice. Some people want the acreage forgotten.
Her pulse quickened. Acreage, land, property. Suddenly, Evelyn's notes felt less like a gardener's journal and more like an investigation. The next several pages became increasingly strange. Missing maps, disputed boundaries, records that no longer matched older documents. Evelyn repeatedly mentioned concerns about local land ownership. Then the entries stopped abruptly. The remaining pages sat blank. Emily stared at the final written sentence. Keep the documents safe. Silence filled the underground room. Whatever Evelyn discovered clearly mattered to her. The question was whether it connected to the locked chest. Around noon, Emily climbed back into the greenhouse. Her head felt crowded with information. The mystery had expanded. Instead of finding answers, she had discovered an entirely new set of questions. Fortunately, practical life forced her attention elsewhere. Rain arrived shortly afterward. Heavy rain. Water leaked through several damaged roof panels. Emily spent most of the afternoon repositioning containers and protecting planting beds. By evening, she was soaked, exhausted, and covered in mud, yet oddly satisfied. The greenhouse was improving, slowly, imperfectly. It was becoming home. The following day, Walter arrived carrying firewood. The old farmer immediately noticed her distracted expression. "You found something?" Emily smiled. Apparently, she remained terrible at hiding secrets. She eventually showed him the underground room. Walter descended the staircase carefully and stood silently for several moments. The old farmer looked around as if recognizing pieces of the past. "I forgot this place existed." Emily frowned. "You knew about it?" Walter nodded slowly. "Not many people did." "Interesting. Very interesting." Then she showed him the chest. Walter crouched beside it. His expression changed immediately. Not fear, recognition. "That's Evelyn's." Emily sat upright. "How do you know?" The old farmer pointed toward a small carved symbol near one corner, a tiny flower. She marked most of her personal belongings. For several moments, Walter simply stared at the lock. Then he surprised her. "I might know where the key is." Emily nearly dropped her flashlight. Walter explained that Evelyn often stored important items inside a cabinet near the greenhouse entrance. Most of the furniture disappeared years ago. One cabinet remained. Emily knew exactly which one he meant. The battered storage cabinet she cleaned during her first week. The same cabinet where she found Evelyn's photograph. Suddenly, everything felt connected. They returned upstairs immediately. For nearly an hour, the two searched every compartment, shelf, and hidden corner. Nothing. Then Emily remembered the stuck drawer. The drawer that contained the photograph. She removed it completely this time. Behind the drawer sat a narrow gap built into the cabinet frame, hidden, deliberately. Her fingers reached inside. Something metallic touched her hand. Slowly, she pulled it free. A small brass key. Both stared at it. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The size looked perfect. The shape looked old. The mystery had just taken another step forward. Later that evening, after Walter left, Emily sat alone inside the underground room. The key rested in her palm. The locked chest waited in front of her. Rain tapped softly against the greenhouse roof overhead. Her heartbeat felt unusually loud. For weeks, she had searched for answers about Evelyn Hart. Now she held the first real chance to find them. Slowly, carefully, she inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. Then she turned it.
A metallic click echoed through the underground chamber. The lock released, and for the first time in decades, Evelyn Hart's hidden chest was finally ready to be opened. Emily froze for a moment after hearing the lock click open. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. For decades, the chest had remained sealed beneath the greenhouse floor. Now, with a single turn of a key, that silence had ended. She sat cross-legged on the stone floor of the underground room, staring at the lid. Part of her wanted to open it immediately. Another part wanted to enjoy the mystery a little longer. Curiosity won. It usually did. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Dust drifted into the flashlight beam. The hinges groaned softly. Then the contents appeared. Not money, not jewelry, not anything valuable in the traditional sense. Instead, the chest contained papers, dozens of them, bundles of letters tied with string, several leather notebooks, a rolled map secured with a faded ribbon, a collection of folders wrapped carefully in oilcloth. Everything had been organized with remarkable care. Evelyn Hart clearly wanted these items preserved. Emily immediately recognized the handwriting on the first envelope. It matched the gardening journals, Evelyn's. She picked up a letter and unfolded it carefully. The date surprised her, nearly 40 years old. Most of the correspondence appeared personal at first. Notes exchanged with friends, community events, farming discussions. Yet as she continued reading, a different pattern emerged. Certain names appeared repeatedly: surveyors, attorneys, county officials. The letters gradually shifted away from gardening and toward land records. Emily's pulse quickened. Evelyn hadn't hidden ordinary correspondence. She had hidden evidence. Hours passed without Emily noticing. Outside, daylight faded. Inside the underground room, she sat surrounded by documents and growing questions. One folder contained property maps. Another held copies of boundary surveys. Several included handwritten notes in the margins. Measurements don't match original filing. Acreage missing from revised survey. Verify county records. The comments felt strangely familiar. Similar to the concerns Evelyn mentioned in her journals. Similar to the warnings that made her hide these materials. Then Emily opened one of the leather notebooks. The title written inside immediately caught her attention. Land Investigation Notes. She sat upright. This wasn't gardening anymore. Evelyn had been conducting an investigation. The notebook detailed years of research, property transfers, survey discrepancies, missing records. Entire sections of farmland seemed to change ownership through paperwork that didn't match earlier documents. At first, Emily struggled to follow everything. Legal descriptions and survey boundaries weren't exactly exciting reading. Yet the deeper she went, the clearer the pattern became. Someone had altered records. Not dramatically. Small changes, tiny adjustments, the sort of modifications most people would never notice. But those small changes added up. Acre by acre, parcel by parcel. Land slowly shifted away from original owners. Then Emily discovered a sentence underlined twice in red ink. They want the missing acreage forgotten. Her pulse accelerated. Missing acreage. The exact phrase she remembered from Evelyn's final journal entries. The phrase felt important, deliberate, like a key piece of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. The next morning, Emily carried several documents to town. She knew exactly who might help. Sarah Collins looked delighted the moment Emily placed the folders on the library table. The librarian immediately abandoned everything else for the next 3 hours. The two women worked through Evelyn's records together. Sarah possessed something Emily lacked: experience with archives,
historical records, research. Several times, she cross-referenced Evelyn's notes against county maps stored in library collections. The results proved surprising. "She's right," Sarah said quietly. Emily looked up. "About what?" Sarah spread several maps across the table. "This parcel." She pointed toward a section highlighted in Evelyn's notes. "It existed on older surveys." Emily leaned closer. The property appeared clearly on a map from 50 years earlier, then disappeared entirely from later versions. Not subdivided, not renamed, gone. Exactly like Evelyn claimed. Sarah frowned. "That's not normal." Emily couldn't stop smiling, not because the situation was good, because someone else finally confirmed Evelyn wasn't imagining things. On the walk home, cold wind swept across harvested fields. Winter felt closer than ever. Several trees had already lost most of their leaves. The greenhouse looked fragile against the gray sky. Yet for the first time, Emily didn't see it as abandoned. She saw it as part of a story, a place where someone had fought to protect something important. Back inside, she spent the afternoon tending plants. The routine grounded her. Watering seedlings, repairing support wires, harvesting spinach. Practical tasks balanced the mystery. Survival and investigation existed side by side now. One kept her alive, the other kept her curious. Later that evening, while organizing documents from the chest, she discovered the rolled map. Unlike the others, this one carried a handwritten note attached to the ribbon. "Open only if necessary." Emily smiled. Every mysterious document in history seemed to include instructions like that. Naturally, she opened it immediately. The map depicted farmland surrounding the greenhouse. Several properties were marked. Most appeared ordinary. Then she noticed a section outlined in red pencil. Missing acreage. The words sat directly beside a parcel of land several miles north of the greenhouse. Her pulse quickened instantly. Evelyn had been tracking a specific property. More importantly, she believed something was wrong with its ownership records. Then Emily noticed additional markings, coordinates, notes, survey references, directions leading toward an abandoned farm listed elsewhere in the documents. The mystery suddenly became larger, much larger. The greenhouse wasn't the center of it. It was merely where Evelyn hid the evidence. Then she found the final item tucked inside the map case, a sealed envelope. Smaller than the others, more personal. Across the front, Evelyn had written only 3 words. "If I disappear." Emily stared at the envelope for several seconds. Her heartbeat seemed unusually loud. Slowly, she opened it. Inside rested a single letter. The handwriting looked rushed compared to Evelyn's other documents, uneven. Urgent. "If you're reading this, then something happened before I could finish proving what I found." Emily sat perfectly still. The room around her seemed to disappear. She continued reading. Evelyn described growing pressure from people who wanted certain records ignored, meetings that ended badly, questions she was told to stop asking. Then came the final paragraph. "The missing acreage isn't the real secret. Follow the original maps. They'll lead you to the truth." Emily lowered the letter slowly. Outside, wind rattled the greenhouse glass. Somewhere above, rain began tapping softly against the roof. Inside, the underground room suddenly felt smaller. Evelyn Hart hadn't vanished randomly. She had been chasing something important enough to hide evidence beneath a greenhouse. something important enough to leave warnings for whoever came next. And according to the map spread across Emily's lap, the next clue waited at an abandoned farm hidden somewhere beyond the northern hills. The abandoned farm took Emily 3 days to reach, not because it was far away, because life kept interrupting. The greenhouse needed attention every morning. Plants required water. Damaged glass panels needed reinforcement before winter winds arrived. A leaking section near the eastern wall demanded immediate repairs after a night of heavy rain. Survival rarely respected mystery schedules. By the time Emily finally set out, a thin layer of frost covered the fields. The air carried the sharp smell of approaching winter. She followed directions from Evelyn's map through back roads and forgotten farm lanes. Most of the journey passed through quiet countryside. Empty fields stretched toward distant hills. Old barns leaned against decades of weather. The landscape felt peaceful, yet the mystery sitting inside her backpack kept her mind racing. According to Evelyn's notes, the missing acreage connected somehow to this location. The question was, how? Nearly 2 hours later, Emily spotted the farm. The property looked abandoned for years. A weathered farmhouse stood near the center of a large field. Several outbuildings surrounded it. Most appeared one storm away from collapse. Tall grass covered everything. Trees had begun reclaiming portions of the land. Yet despite the decay, something felt familiar. She couldn't explain it immediately. Then she realized why. The place resembled her greenhouse. Forgotten, ignored, left behind by everyone except history. Emily approached carefully. The farmhouse itself offered little of interest. Most rooms sat empty. Dust covered every surface. Nature had slowly invaded through broken windows. Yet Evelyn's map didn't highlight the house. It highlighted a small equipment shed near the northern edge of the property. Naturally, that became Emily's destination. The shed looked ordinary at first glance. Rusted roof, faded paint, sagging walls. Yet the map specifically marked it with a red circle. Evelyn clearly considered it important. Inside, abandoned farming equipment occupied most of the space. Old tools hung from walls. Empty fuel cans sat in corners. Nothing immediately stood out. Emily spent nearly 30 minutes searching before frustration appeared. Maybe Evelyn had been wrong. Maybe time had erased whatever clue once existed here. Then her boot struck something unusual, a hollow sound. She froze. The noise came from beneath a section of wooden flooring near the rear wall. Her pulse quickened immediately. Hidden spaces had become a recurring theme lately. Kneeling carefully, she examined the area. Several floorboards appeared newer than the others. Not new, less old, deliberately replaced. 20 minutes later, she managed to pry one loose. Beneath it sat a narrow metal box. Emily laughed softly. Of course. At this point, she almost expected forgotten containers to appear everywhere she looked. The box wasn't locked. Inside rested several folded documents protected by waxed paper. Property surveys, land transfer records, handwritten notes, more evidence supporting Evelyn's investigation. Yet one document stood apart from the others. A survey map dated nearly 60 years earlier. Emily unfolded it carefully. The missing acreage appeared clearly marked. Not only did it exist, it connected directly to several neighboring properties. Modern records showed completely different boundaries. The discrepancy wasn't small. Entire sections of farmland had been reassigned. Her pulse accelerated. Evelyn wasn't exaggerating. Someone had altered ownership records on a significant scale. Then Emily noticed handwriting along the map's edge. Original survey hidden after revision. Keep safe. Evelyn's note. The map represented proof, real proof, not theories, not suspicions, proof. The discovery should have felt exciting. Instead, it made the mystery seem larger than ever. Why would someone go to such lengths to hide land records? What made this acreage so valuable? The answer arrived unexpectedly later that afternoon. On her way home, Emily stopped at Walter's farm. The old farmer listened quietly while she explained what she found. When she showed him the original survey map, he became unusually serious. "I remember this property." Emily looked up immediately. "You do?" Walter nodded slowly. "My father talked about it when I was a kid." Finally, another first-hand connection. They sat inside Walter's workshop, drinking coffee while evening settled outside. The old farmer studied the map for several minutes before speaking again. People always thought the acreage disappeared because of paperwork mistakes. Emily already knew that explanation didn't hold up. And Walter sighed. My father never believed that. The room fell quiet. Walter rarely shared stories unless they mattered. What did he think? The old farmer tapped the survey map. He thought someone wanted control of the water rights. Emily frowned. Water rights. The phrase sounded important, potentially very important. Walter explained that decades earlier, several underground springs crossed portions of the missing acreage. Farms depended on them. Future development depended on them. Whoever controlled the land controlled access to valuable water resources. Suddenly, the mystery made much more sense. Land itself wasn't always the prize. Sometimes what existed beneath the land mattered more. Emily immediately remembered Evelyn's letter. The missing acreage isn't the real secret. Follow the original maps. They'll lead you to the truth. Maybe Evelyn wasn't investigating farmland at all. Maybe she was investigating what the farmland contained. That night, back at the greenhouse, Emily spread every map across her table. Lantern light flickered against the glass walls while wind rattled the roof. Hours passed as she compared old surveys with modern records. Gradually, a pattern emerged. Every altered property shared one feature: underground water access. Springs, wells, natural water channels. The realization sent a chill through her. Evelyn had uncovered something far bigger than a boundary dispute. Then Sarah arrived unexpectedly the next morning, carrying a folder from the library archives. The librarian looked unusually excited. "You're not going to believe this." Emily smiled. She was hearing that phrase more often lately. Sarah opened the folder and produced a historical development proposal from decades earlier. Several investors once planned a major commercial project in the area. The project never happened. Yet the proposed site overlapped perfectly with the missing acreage. Emily stared. The pieces finally began fitting together. Land records changed, property disappeared, water access shifted, development plans followed. Someone had a motive. A very strong motive. Then Sarah pointed toward a handwritten notation attached to the proposal. The name listed beneath it made both women freeze. Evelyn Hart. Her signature appeared beside a formal objection to the project. She had tried to stop it. More importantly, she had documented why. Tucked behind the proposal rested another sheet of paper, a location, an address, an old farmhouse listed as Evelyn's final meeting place before she vanished from public records. Emily slowly lowered the page. The mystery had just opened another door, and somewhere beyond it
waited the truth. Evelyn Hart spent decades trying to protect. Winter arrived 3 days later. Not gradually, not politely. It arrived with wind strong enough to shake the greenhouse frame and snow that seemed determined to bury every path Emily had spent months clearing. She woke before dawn to a loud crack somewhere outside. For one terrifying moment, she thought the greenhouse roof had collapsed. Pulling on her coat, she rushed outside into freezing darkness. Snow whipped across the fields. Ice coated the ground. The source of the noise turned out to be a fallen tree branch resting against the western wall. Relief flooded through her. The structure remained standing. Barely. By sunrise, the storm had intensified. Visibility dropped dramatically. The greenhouse creaked and groaned beneath the pressure of accumulating snow. Emily spent the entire morning moving through the structure with a broom, pushing snow away from vulnerable roof sections before the weight became dangerous. Every hour felt like a small battle. By noon, her gloves were soaked, her shoulders ached, her hands felt numb. Yet she kept working. Nobody else was coming. The greenhouse depended on her. The irony wasn't lost on Emily. Months earlier, she depended on the greenhouse for survival. Now the greenhouse depended on her. Somewhere along the way, they had become partners. That evening, Walter appeared unexpectedly in his truck. The old farmer looked like a man fighting a snowstorm through sheer stubbornness. He carried firewood, canned food, and enough concern to fill the greenhouse twice over. "Thought you might need supplies." Emily nearly hugged him. Instead, she settled for helping unload the truck. The old farmer inspected the structure carefully. "She's holding together." Emily smiled. "Mostly." Walter laughed. "Mostly counts during winter." They spent an hour reinforcing vulnerable sections near the entrance. Before leaving, Walter paused beside the planting beds where lettuce and spinach still managed to survive despite the season. "Evelyn would have liked this." Emily looked up. The statement felt simple, yet it carried weight. More and more, she found herself wondering what Evelyn Hart would think about the greenhouse now. The mystery no longer felt separate from her life. It had become part of it. The storm continued for nearly a week. During that time, Emily rarely left the property. Her days revolved around survival, water collection, snow removal, greenhouse maintenance, careful rationing of food. The mystery waited patiently in the background. Winter demanded immediate attention. Yet even while shoveling snow, she found herself thinking about Evelyn's final meeting place. The address Sarah discovered remained pinned above her work table. Every time she passed it, curiosity returned. Then the blizzard arrived. If the previous storm had been difficult, this one felt personal. Wind howled through the night. Snow hammered the glass panels. Temperatures plunged below anything Emily had experienced since moving into the greenhouse. Around midnight, a violent gust shattered one of the repaired roof sections. The sound jolted her awake instantly. Freezing air poured inside. Emily scrambled from bed and spent the next hour securing plastic sheeting over the opening, while snow blew around her. By the time she finished, her hands trembled from cold and exhaustion. She collapsed into a chair and stared at the greenhouse around her. For the first time since buying the property, she considered giving up. Not permanently, just briefly. The thought surprised her. She had survived homelessness, rebuilt an abandoned greenhouse, uncovered a decades-old mystery. Yet winter possessed a unique ability to make every problem feel larger. Fortunately, dawn brought perspective and coffee. Walter arrived again carrying both. "You look terrible," he announced. Emily smiled weakly.
Thanks. You're welcome. The old farmer handed her a thermos. Drink. Sometimes wisdom arrived in simple forms. The blizzard finally ended 2 days later. Sunlight returned. The landscape emerged, transformed beneath deep snow. Everything looked brighter, cleaner, quieter. Emily spent the morning inspecting damage around the property. Several repairs would be necessary. Nothing catastrophic. Another small victory. Then she noticed something unusual. Near the greenhouse entrance, a section of ground had collapsed slightly during the storm. At first, she assumed melting snow caused the depression. Then she spotted wood beneath the exposed soil. Her pulse quickened immediately. The greenhouse apparently wasn't finished revealing secrets. She grabbed a shovel. Several minutes later, the outline became visible. Another buried container, smaller than Evelyn's chest. Different construction. Carefully, she lifted it free. The box appeared water-resistant and surprisingly well-preserved. Inside rested a collection of documents wrapped in oilcloth. Emily immediately recognized the handwriting. Evelyn's. Yet these papers differed from previous discoveries. They weren't investigation notes. They were legal documents, survey certifications, property ownership records, original filings, the kind of paperwork officials relied upon. More importantly, several carried official seals, authentic, verifiable, powerful. Emily carried everything inside and began reviewing the contents. The significance became obvious quickly. These weren't supporting records. These were primary records, original records, the exact documents someone would need to prove ownership claims. Then she found a survey map unlike any she had seen before. This one carried signatures from multiple county officials. The missing acreage appeared clearly defined, undisputed, legally recognized. Proof. Real proof. Her heartbeat accelerated. Sarah needed to see this immediately. So did Walter. Maybe even county officials. Yet one final item remained inside the box. A sealed envelope marked with a familiar phrase, "For the future." Emily opened it carefully. The letter inside appeared older than most of Evelyn's writings, more reflective, less urgent. If someone finds these records, it means the truth survived. Emily continued reading. Evelyn described years spent protecting evidence after realizing official archives could no longer be trusted. She moved documents repeatedly, hid copies in different locations, created backups of backups, not because she expected recognition, because she believed facts mattered. Then came the final paragraph. The land was never the most important thing. The people who depended on it were. Protect them if you can. Emily lowered the letter slowly. Outside, snow reflected the afternoon sunlight. Inside, the greenhouse felt warmer somehow. Not physically, emotionally. For months, she had been chasing clues. Now she finally held the evidence Evelyn spent decades protecting. More importantly, she understood why. This was never about a piece of missing acreage. It was about fairness, history, people. Then her eyes drifted toward the address pinned above the table. Evelyn's final meeting place. One location still unexplored. One question still unanswered. What happened to Evelyn Hart? And somewhere beyond the snow-covered hills, the answer was waiting. The road to Evelyn Hart's final meeting place remained buried beneath snow for nearly 2 weeks. Winter refused to loosen its grip. Every morning, Emily checked conditions. Every morning, the answer remained the same. Not yet. The delay frustrated her more than she expected. After everything she had uncovered, the final unanswered question felt impossible to ignore. What happened to Evelyn Hart? The evidence suggested she didn't simply disappear. The journals, the hidden chest, the buried records, the letters. Everything pointed toward a woman who knew she was running out of time. Yet despite her urgency, none of the documents explained how her story ended. While waiting for the roads to clear, Emily focused on the greenhouse. Survival still came first. The winter storms had damaged several growing sections. One row of spinach failed completely after a freezing night. A cracked support beam near the western wall required reinforcement. Water barrels froze repeatedly. Life remained difficult. Yet something had changed. The greenhouse no longer felt temporary. It felt permanent. Emily caught herself planning for spring. New planting beds, additional repairs, expansion projects, future. For the first time in a long time, she had one. Walter noticed the change immediately. One afternoon, while helping replace damaged roof panels, he smiled and said, "You stopped talking about surviving the winter." Emily looked up from her work. "What do you mean?" "Now you're talking about next summer." She hadn't realized it, yet he was right. The observation stayed with her long after he left. 3 weeks earlier, she was fighting to make it through each day. Now she was making plans months ahead. The greenhouse had quietly become home. Then, finally, the weather changed. Warmer temperatures arrived. Snow retreated from roads and fields. Mud replaced ice. It wasn't pretty. It was progress. Early the next morning, Emily loaded Evelyn's map, several documents, and a thermos of coffee into her backpack. The address from Sarah's archives led to an isolated farmhouse nearly 20 miles away. According to county records, the property had been abandoned for decades, which made it exactly the kind of place where answers liked to hide. The drive took longer than expected. Rural roads remained rough from winter damage. Several times she wondered whether she had missed a turn. Then she saw it. The farmhouse sat alone on a hill overlooking empty fields. Time had not been kind. Paint peeled from the walls. Several windows were boarded shut. The porch leaned noticeably to one side. Yet the structure remained standing, like the greenhouse, like Evelyn's records, like the truth itself. Emily parked and approached carefully. Wind moved through dead grass surrounding the property. The silence felt almost eerie. She climbed the porch steps and tried the front door. Locked. Not surprising. A quick search around the exterior revealed a partially open side entrance. Dust coated everything inside. Sunlight filtered through broken shutters. The house smelled of age and forgotten years. Room by room she explored. Most contained little of interest. Empty furniture, old boxes, abandoned belongings. Nothing connected to Evelyn. Then she reached a small study near the rear of the house. Her pulse quickened immediately. Bookshelves lined the walls. Filing cabinets occupied one corner. A desk sat beneath a window overlooking the fields. Someone had worked here. More importantly, someone had left in a hurry. Papers remained scattered across the desk surface. Most had been ruined by moisture. One survived. Emily carefully picked it up. The signature at the bottom made her heart skip. Evelyn Hart. For several seconds, she simply stared. This was it. Proof that Evelyn had been here. Proof that she hadn't imagined the connection. The document itself appeared to be part of a legal challenge involving disputed property ownership, one of many. Yet it established something important. Evelyn spent time at this farmhouse during her investigation. Then Emily noticed a loose floorboard beneath the desk. At this point, hidden compartments had become almost expected. Almost. She knelt carefully and lifted the board. Beneath it rested a flat wooden box, smaller than the greenhouse chest. Older. More personal. Emily carried it to the desk and opened it slowly. Inside rested photographs, letters, and a leather journal. Not investigation notes. Personal writings. The final journal. She knew it immediately. The first entry dated only weeks before Evelyn vanished from public records. Emily sat down and began reading. The pages revealed a woman under pressure. Not frightened. Determined. Evelyn described meetings with officials who dismissed her concerns. Developers who insisted records were accurate despite evidence proving otherwise. Friends urging her to stop. Yet she refused. Again and again, she returned to the same belief. Truth matters. Several entries later, Emily found the answer she had been chasing for months. Evelyn never disappeared, not in the dramatic way local rumors suggested. She left voluntarily. Her health had begun failing. The stress of the investigation made everything worse. Realizing she might not live long enough to finish, she focused on preserving evidence instead. She hid records, created copies, established trails future researchers could follow. Then she quietly moved to live with relatives in another state. The mystery wasn't her disappearance. The mystery was why nobody knew the truth afterward. The answer came several pages later. Evelyn wanted it that way. She believed attention should remain on the evidence, not on her. Emily felt unexpectedly emotional reading those words. For months, Evelyn had existed as a ghost haunting old records, a mystery inside another mystery. Now she felt human, real. The final journal entries carried a different tone. Peaceful, reflective. Evelyn understood she wouldn't finish the fight herself. She accepted that. What mattered was giving someone else the chance. Then Emily reached the final page. A folded letter rested between the pages. Across the front, Evelyn had written one sentence. To the person who finds the greenhouse. Emily laughed softly. The timing felt impossible. Slowly, she unfolded the letter. Evelyn thanked whoever eventually uncovered the records. She described the greenhouse as her favorite place in the world, a place where she learned patience, resilience, hope. Then came the final paragraph. If you're reading this, then the greenhouse survived. I hope it became a home for someone who needed one. Emily lowered the letter for several moments. She simply sat in silence. Outside, wind moved across the fields. Inside, sunlight illuminated dust drifting through the abandoned study. The mystery was solved. Evelyn Hart had spent decades protecting evidence because she believed future generations deserved the truth. And somehow, against impossible odds, her plan worked. Yet as Emily prepared to leave, she discovered one final document tucked inside the journal cover. An original ownership charter. The last missing piece proving exactly who controlled the disputed acreage before records were altered. The strongest evidence yet. Emily stared at it and smiled. Evelyn wasn't finished helping. Even now. And with the final proof finally in her hands, Emily knew exactly what needed to happen next. The town hall meeting was supposed to be ordinary. At least, that was what the announcement claimed. A review of historical land records, public discussion, administrative recommendations.
Nothing about the notice suggested decades of hidden evidence, missing acreage, or an abandoned greenhouse that had quietly preserved the truth. Yet by the time Emily arrived, nearly every seat was occupied. Farmers sat beside business owners. Retired residents filled the front rows. Local officials clustered near the stage. Sarah was already there organizing copies of Evelyn's records. Walter occupied his usual position near the back, pretending not to enjoy the attention. Emily carried the final ownership charter inside a protective folder. Even now, holding it felt surreal. A few months earlier, she had been homeless with $50 and nowhere to sleep. Now she was helping solve a mystery that had lingered for generations. Life had become strange in the best possible way. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Historical maps covered tables. Survey records circulated through the crowd. Sarah presented timelines showing how ownership boundaries changed over the decades. Every piece of evidence supported the same conclusion. Original records had been altered. Acreage disappeared from official documentation. Water rights shifted accordingly. The missing acreage was never truly missing. It had simply been hidden behind paperwork. Then Emily presented Evelyn Hart's final documents. The room grew noticeably quieter. People listened. Really listened for the first time. Evelyn wasn't just a forgotten name in local rumors. She became a person, a woman who spent years protecting evidence because she believed the truth mattered. By the end of the evening, nobody questioned her motives. They only wished they had listened sooner. The strongest reaction came when Emily revealed the original ownership charter, discovered inside Evelyn's final journal. The document connected every missing piece: property boundaries, water access, legal ownership, everything. One elderly farmer stood and slowly removed his hat. "My grandfather used to talk about this land," he said. Nobody believed him. Several others nodded. Stories began emerging from across the room. Memories, family histories, fragments of conversations passed down through generations. Little pieces of the mystery that suddenly made sense. When the meeting finally ended, county officials agreed to reopen historical reviews of several disputed records. More importantly, they officially recognized Evelyn Hart's documentation as valid evidence. The truth she spent decades protecting had finally survived. Spring arrived shortly afterward. Snow disappeared. Fields turned green again. Life returned to the countryside. Back at the greenhouse, Emily focused on rebuilding. New planting beds appeared. Damaged roof sections were replaced. Additional rainwater systems improved efficiency. Every week brought visible progress. The greenhouse no longer resembled the abandoned ruin she bought for $50. Flowers appeared along the walkways. Vegetables filled the growing beds. Fresh glass reflected sunlight where broken panels once stood. Visitors occasionally stopped by just to see the place. Most wanted to hear the story. Emily usually preferred talking about the plants. The mystery was fascinating. The greenhouse felt more important. One afternoon, Sarah arrived carrying a small package. "I found something." Emily laughed. Those words rarely led anywhere ordinary. Inside the package rested a framed photograph. The original image of Evelyn Hart standing inside the greenhouse decades earlier. Restored, cleaned, beautiful. Emily stared at it for several moments. The greenhouse in the photograph looked remarkably similar to the one surrounding her now. Thriving plants, warm sunlight, purpose. Sarah smiled. Thought she should come home. Emily placed the photograph near her work table that same day.
It remained there permanently. Summer brought unexpected opportunities. Farmers' market sales increased. Local restaurants purchased fresh herbs and vegetables. A community gardening program asked Emily to help teach greenhouse basics to students. The idea seemed ridiculous at first. Then she remembered how much she had learned herself. Somehow, without noticing, she had become the kind of person others asked for advice. Walter found this endlessly amusing. "Told you the greenhouse would take care of you." Emily laughed. "You definitely never said that." "I implied it." By autumn, exactly 1 year after buying the property, the greenhouse looked transformed. Not perfect, better, alive. One crisp evening, Emily walked through the rows of growing plants as sunlight filtered through the repaired glass overhead. The golden light filled the structure with warmth. Everything felt peaceful. The planting beds overflowed with produce. Herbs hung drying near the storage room. New seedlings waited for the next season. This place had become more than shelter. It had become home. Later that evening, she climbed down into the underground room one final time. The hidden chamber remained exactly as she remembered. Stone walls, wooden shelves, Evelyn's preserved records. Yet the atmosphere felt different now. The mystery was over. The answers had been found. Emily sat quietly for several minutes before opening the final letter Evelyn wrote to the future. She had read it many times. Tonight felt different. If you're reading this, then the greenhouse survived. I hope it became a home for someone who needed one. Emily smiled softly. Outside, wind moved gently through the fields. Somewhere beyond the walls, crickets sang in the fading light. The greenhouse had survived. More importantly, so had she. When she first arrived, she possessed $50, a backpack, and nowhere to go. She expected only a roof, a place to survive winter. Instead, she found purpose, community, friendship, a future. Evelyn Hart spent decades protecting the truth because she believed someone would eventually continue the work. She was right. Emily carefully returned the letter to its box and climbed back into the greenhouse. Dusk settled across the countryside. Lantern light glowed warmly through the glass. Rows of healthy plants stretched before her. The old greenhouse no longer felt abandoned. It felt loved. As darkness slowly replaced daylight, Emily stood near the center planting table where everything began. The disturbed patch of soil, the hidden hatch, the locked trunk, the mystery that changed her life. She laughed softly at the memory. $50. That was all she had. $50 and a desperate hope that she could survive. In return, the greenhouse gave her far more than shelter. It gave her food when she was hungry, purpose when she felt lost, friends when she felt alone, and a future hidden beneath the soil, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to uncover it. The last rays of sunlight passed through the glass above, illuminating the greenhouse in gold. For a brief moment, it almost felt as if Evelyn Hart was smiling somewhere among the plants. Then the light faded, the evening settled in, and Emily closed the door of the greenhouse she had saved. The place everyone else had forgotten had finally become a home again.